Have you ever made a decision you regretted the second it was done? Not just a small mistake, but a choice that floods your veins with ice and makes every instinct you have screamed that you've just locked yourself in a cage with a predator? Most of us are lucky. We live our lives and never have to face that feeling. But for some of us, that feeling becomes a memory burned into our minds forever. Welcome to Daily Horror FM. Tonight, I'm going to tell you about the night I gave a ride to the wrong person. A ride that made me install a dash cam and question every shadow I've seen in my rearview mirror since. This all went down a few months back. I've been a rideshare driver for a couple of years, and the late night shift has always been my bread and butter. The city sleeps, the roads are empty, and the tips, well, they're just better. But there's a price for that peace and quiet. Every now and then, you collect a story that clings to you, a sticky, dark residue you can't wash off. I've always considered myself a pretty good judge of character. I've dealt with drunks, ranters, and all-around weirdos. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, prepared me for the man I picked up that night. My car, a trusty 2005 Volvo, is my partner in crime. It's a beat-up old thing, with a permanent faint smell of pine air freshener failing to cover the scent of 1,000 strangers. It makes these odd groaning sounds when I accelerate too fast, but it's never let me down. That night, the streets were like a ghost town, just the way I liked it. The sodium streetlights cast long, distorted shadows, and the world felt like it was holding its breath. It was sometime after 2 a.m. when the request pinged on my phone. A pickup from a convenience store just a few blocks away. Simple enough. But as I accepted the ride, a strange feeling coiled in the pit of my stomach. You know that feeling, right? That primal, electric hump that tells you something is fundamentally wrong, even when your eyes can't see it yet. That's what hit me. It was a cold dread that started in my gut and spread to my fingertips. As I turned onto the street, I saw why. The convenience store, the pickup location, was completely dark. The bright, obnoxious logos were unlit, the windows were black mirrors reflecting my headlights, and there wasn't a single other car in the cracked asphalt lot. It was closed, abandoned for the night. And then I saw him. I slowed the Volvo to a crawl, my headlights cutting through the darkness and pinning him in their beam. He was pacing back and forth in front of the locked glass doors. He wore a hoodie that looked less like clothing and more like a collection of stains and holes held together by sheer grit. I'm not exaggerating. A huge, gaping hole in the sleeve revealed a pale, thin arm. His movements were off. They were jerky and unnatural, like a marionette with tangled strings. He'd take 3 quick steps, stop, and whip his head around, scanning the empty street behind him as if expecting an ambush. My first thought, the most logical one, was that he was high on something. Badly. My finger hovered over the cancel button on my phone. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to do it. Just cancel, drive away, and forget this ever happened. But for some reason, a reason I still can't explain or forgive myself for, I didn't. Maybe it was a misguided sense of duty. Maybe I felt a flicker of pity. Whatever it was a mistake. I pulled up to the curb, the automatic locks clicked open, and he slid into the back seat without a single word. The moment I took my foot off the brake, I knew. I could feel the atmosphere in the car change. It became heavy, charged with a strange, hostile energy. Most passengers, even the weird ones, will find a distraction. They'll scroll on their phones, they'll look out the window, they'll pretend you don't exist. Not this guy. I glanced in my rearview mirror and my blood went cold. He was just sitting there, perfectly still, staring directly at me. His eyes, dark and sunken in the shadows of his hood, were locked on mine in the mirror. He wasn't blinking. He wasn't looking away. It was the most intense, predatory gaze I have ever felt. I tried to ignore it, to focus on the road, on the yellow lines slipping by under my wheels. But it was like a physical weight pressing on the back of my neck. I couldn't help but let my eyes dart back to the mirror every few seconds, and each time, He was still there, staring. There was a raw anger in his expression that was deeply, deeply unsettling. The silence in the car was deafening, broken only by the hum of the engine. I couldn't take it. My hand fumbled for the radio, desperate for any noise to break the tension. I turned the dial, and some generic pop song filled the car. The moment the music started, he snapped. "Turn it off." His voice was a low, gravelly rasp, thick with years of smoking. It wasn't a request. It was a command. The suddenness of it made me jump, and I jerked the steering wheel. My heart hammered against my ribs. I resisted the overpowering urge to look at him again, to meet that terrifying gaze. I just did as he said, my knuckles white as I gripped the steering wheel. The silence returned, 10 times heavier than before. I was trapped in this metal box with him, and I had willingly let him in. This was fast becoming the kind of creepy rideshare story you only hear about on podcasts from channels like Daily Horror FM. We drove for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes. I thought, I hoped, that maybe he'd just sit there in his menacing silence until we reached his destination. But of course, he wouldn't. He leaned forward slightly, and I could smell stale smoke and something else, something sour and metallic. "You ever pick someone up you shouldn't have?" he asked, his voice low and conversational, which was somehow even more terrifying. The question hit me like a physical blow. I managed a weak, strangled laugh. "Oh, well, I hope not," I said, trying to keep my voice light, trying to pretend this was a normal, quirky conversation. He didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. He just leaned back in his seat, the worn fabric creaking under his weight, and muttered something to himself that I couldn't quite catch. Then, he launched into a story. He told me he used to be a driver too, for Uber. He talked about how he quit because some punks had stolen things from his car. His words were slurred, and he'd occasionally trail off, but I got the main points. And the whole time he was telling this story about being a victim, about being robbed, he was smiling. I caught it in the mirror, a thin, unnerving smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was the smile of someone enjoying a private, twisted joke. He ended his story with a line that I will never forget. He leaned forward again, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "It's a funny thing, isn't it? The trust you put in a complete stranger. Letting them sit right behind you like this. So vulnerable." That was it. That was the moment he went from just a weirdo to a genuine threat in my mind. He wasn't just a dangerous passenger. He was toying with me. My pulse was a frantic drum against my eardrums. I kept my eyes glued to the road, but my mind was a maelstrom of panic. I glanced at the GPS, focusing on the destination address like it was a lifeline, a beacon of hope in this nightmare. He didn't stop talking, though. He started babbling, his words a jumbled mix of nonsense and deeply concerning fragments. At one point, he started apologizing, but not to me. He was talking to someone who wasn't there. I didn't mean it. He kept repeating, his voice frantic and laced with something that sounded like regret. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm a bad person." I didn't say a word. I didn't dare. I didn't know what he'd done, what horrible act he was confessing to in the back of my car, but I knew I didn't want to become his next apology. We were just a few minutes from his drop-off point. I could see the street name coming up on the GPS. Freedom was so close. Suddenly, he snapped out of his trance. "You missed the turn," he roared, his voice exploding in the small space. I hadn't. The GPS was clear. We were on the right path. But his shout was so violent, so full of rage, that I slammed on the brakes out of pure, reflexive fear. The car screeched to a halt in the middle of the empty road. "Pull over. Now," he demanded. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely keep them on the wheel. I did what he said. I pulled the car over to the side of the road, the tires crunching on the gravel shoulder. I just wanted it to be over. I shifted the car into park, my entire body trembling. And then, a miracle. Headlights bloomed in my rearview mirror. Bright, Official headlights. A police car. It was cruising slowly down the road, its spotlight sweeping back and forth, cutting through the darkness. I said a silent, desperate prayer of thanks. As the spotlight passed over my car, the man in the back seat did something bizarre. He slouched down, folding his body in on itself, trying to disappear. I risked a quick glance over my shoulder and saw him lying almost perfectly flat across the back seat, his eyes squeezed shut, trying to make himself invisible. I whipped my head back around, my heart pounding, trying to regulate my breathing so the officer wouldn't think anything was wrong. The police car continued on its way and disappeared around a bend. The man stayed in that position for a horribly long, uncomfortable moment. The silence was thick with unspoken threats. Finally, slowly, he sat up. He looked at me in the mirror one last time. "You got lucky," he rasped. Before I could process it, before I could even breathe, he threw his door open, scrambled out of the car, and vanished into the darkness of the trees by the side of the road. I sat there for a full 5 minutes, unable to move, my hands still shaking. I ended my shift right then and there. I drove straight home, locked my doors, and didn't sleep a wink. It wasn't until a couple of weeks later that I understood just how lucky I'd been. I was scrolling through a local news site on my phone when a headline made me freeze. Armed robbery at 24-hour convenience store. The article detailed a robbery that had taken place on the exact night I picked that guy up. The store was just 2 blocks from where I had found him pacing in the dark. It all clicked into place. The closed store, his paranoia, his confession, his terror at the sight of the police. I had been his unwitting getaway driver. I was inches away from a violent criminal who had just robbed a store and could have done anything to me to ensure his escape. I try not to think about what would have happened if that police car hadn't driven by at that exact moment. I've been much more careful since then, and you can bet I never drive without my dash cam running. There was a time when the constant noise of the city was my life's soundtrack. The blare of horns, the rumble of the subway, the chorus of a million conversations. I thought that was what I wanted. I built my life around it. But after a deeply traumatic event, something I won't get into, my relationship with sound was shattered. My psychiatrist diagnosed it as a rare, severe case of phonophobia. It wasn't just a dislike of noise, it was a physical aversion. Imagine the pins and needles feeling when a limb falls asleep, but imagine it in your chest, a constant, buzzing anxiety, bracing for an impact that never comes. Every slamming door, every shout, was like a jolt of electricity straight to my nervous system. I couldn't live like that. So, about 3 years ago, I ran. I found a small cabin for rent, buried deep in the forests of the Pacific Northwest. I won't say exactly where, for reasons that will soon become terrifyingly clear, but it was somewhere remote in Oregon. It was the antidote to my poisoned life. Almost no neighbors, no traffic, and barely a single bar of cell service. But the real selling point, the thing that made me sign the lease without a second thought, was the silence. A profound, healing quiet. It was just me and the gentle sounds of nature. For the first time in years, I felt like I might finally be safe. The cabin itself was small, but it was solid. You could tell it was built to withstand the elements, with thick, rough-hewn wooden beams and a big stone fireplace that dominated the main room. It had that comforting, earthy smell of pine needles and old paper. The nearest neighbor, according to the listing, was a 10-minute walk down a winding dirt path. For the first week, I just existed. I soaked in the quiet. I woke up to the chirping of birds instead of the wail of sirens. At night, the only sound was the wind whispering through the colossal fir trees. I worked from my laptop, a digital nomad in a sea of green. I had no reason to connect with the outside world, and that's exactly how I wanted it. About a week after I'd settled in, there was a knock at the door. It wasn't a doorbell chime, just the blunt, wooden thud of knuckles on oak. I opened it, and there she was, my neighbor. She looked like she'd stepped right out of a folk tale, A woman who looked to be in her late 60s, with a cascade of long, wild gray hair and the most piercing blue eyes I'd ever seen. She was holding a small basket filled with what looked like homemade preserves. She introduced herself as Michelle. She spoke in a clipped, direct way, confirming she lived down the trail. 10 minutes didn't sound far, but in those dense woods, it was another world. You could get lost just trying to find a good spot to gather firewood. Her eyes seemed to look right through me, and her welcome felt less like a friendly greeting and more like an assessment. She extended the basket, not offering it so much as commanding me to take it. I took it, thanking her, but she just kept staring, her expression unreadable. An awkward silence stretched between us. It was clear this was a woman who was not used to small talk. Finally, she spoke, and her words were so strange, so rehearsed, that I've never forgotten them. She said, "Keep your lanterns full, for the darkness here has teeth. Keep your windows locked, for the wind carries whispers. And keep your wits sharper than your axe, because out here, they're the only weapon you've got." It wasn't advice. It was a recitation, a warning. I just nodded and smiled, desperate to end the bizarre interaction. I stepped back and shut the door, listening. I expected to hear her footsteps walking away, but there was nothing, just silence. She stood on my porch for a full minute before I finally heard the crunch of her boots on the dirt path. It was unsettling, to say the least. Still, I told myself, she was just a reclusive but kind woman. Another soul who sought solitude. It was nice to know someone was nearby. I set her basket down, unopened, and tried to forget about the strangeness of it all. That night, a thunderstorm rolled in, a rare thing for this part of Oregon, but it happens. The power flickered and died, plunging the cabin into darkness. I lit candles, curled up with a book, and listened to the rain lashing against the windows and the deep rumble of thunder. The natural chaos didn't trigger my phonophobia. It was almost soothing. But that peace was shattered. Hours later, a frantic banging on the door made me jump out of my skin. It wasn't a knock. It was a desperate, loud pounding. My heart ignited with that familiar, awful, pins and needles dread. I grabbed a heavy flashlight and crept to the door, peering through the small glass pane. It was Michelle, soaked to the bone, her wild hair plastered to her face, her eyes wide with alarm. I wrenched the door open. Before I could speak, she blurted out, "There's someone by your woodpile." I saw them. Her words sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just a quirky neighbor anymore. This was a potential intruder. My dream of an isolated cabin horror scenario was becoming a reality. I stepped onto the porch with her, shining my flashlight beam into the torrential rain. All I could see were the thrashing silhouettes of trees and the shimmering curtain of water. "Are you sure?" I yelled over the storm. She nodded frantically, her eyes darting towards the woods as if the person she saw was about to emerge. The whole thing felt surreal and terrifying. Before I could ask another question, she muttered, "Be careful," turned, and marched back down the path into the storm, her own flashlight beam a wobbly beacon that was quickly swallowed by the night. I stood there, drenched and confused, until she was gone. The second I shut and bolted the door, the inconsistencies of her story crashed down on me. Her cabin was a 10-minute walk away. The woods were dense. How could she possibly have seen someone near my woodpile from her property, especially in this storm? She must have already been on my land. But why? Why would my supposedly reclusive, creepy neighbor be snooping around my cabin in the middle of a thunderstorm? Was she lying? Sleep was impossible. I sat in the dark, my ears straining, listening to the storm slowly die down. Hours passed. The rain softened to a drizzle. The thunder faded. I was just starting to think it was all a bizarre, storm-induced hallucination, just as I was starting to let my guard down, when I heard it. A sharp crack, the unmistakable sound of a dry branch snapping under a heavy foot, just outside my bedroom window. I froze, every muscle in my body rigid. I'm a light sleeper, and I knew that sound. It wasn't an animal. I held my breath, listening. Silence. After what felt like an eternity, I crept to the window, my heart hammering. At first, I saw nothing but moonlit trees, and then my blood ran cold. It was her, Michelle. She was standing at the very edge of the woods, her back mostly to me. It was unmistakably her, the long, disheveled hair a silhouette against the pale light. She was just standing there, watching. I saw her begin to turn her head, and I ducked below the windowsill, my back pressed against the cold wall. I stayed there, crouched in the dark, for what felt like forever. When I finally dared to look again, she was gone. What was I supposed to do? Call the police and tell them my neighbor was standing in the woods? She hadn't done anything, not really. But the warning, the lie about the woodpile, now this. It was a pattern of escalating strangeness that terrified me. Why warn me about an intruder if she was the one lurking in the shadows? I was wide awake, my nerves frayed, when it happened again. Another knock at the front door. This one was different. It wasn't the frantic banging from before. It was a soft, patient, quiet tapping. Tap, tap, tap. It was somehow more sinister than the loud banging had been. I wasn't moving. I wasn't making a sound. The pins and needles sensation was back, a fire in my chest. I quietly made my way back to the front door, my flashlight held like a club, and took a slow, careful peek through the glass pane. My heart stopped. It wasn't Michelle. It was a man. A big, burly man, completely bald, with a thick, dark beard that covered half his face. His expression was blank, his eyes like chips of stone. My fear went from a 6 to a 10. I backed away from the door as silently as I could, retreated to the bathroom, locked the door, and dialed 911 with trembling fingers. As I was whispering to the operator, the real noise began. A deafening crash against the front door, then another, and another. He was trying to break it down. The operator told me help was on the way, to stay on the line, to stay quiet. I huddled on the cold tile floor, convinced I was about to die. With a final, sickening splintering sound, the front door gave way. I heard it crash open against the wall. I heard heavy boots stepping inside my sanctuary. Then, the sounds of destruction began. Glass shattering, wood splintering, furniture being thrown. He was tearing my home apart. I pressed myself into the corner of the bathroom, covering my mouth to stifle my terrified sobs, praying he wouldn't check the doors. Luckily, he didn't. The sounds of his rampage were contained to the living room. After a few minutes of terrifying chaos, it stopped. The silence that followed was even worse. The police arrived surprisingly fast, but not fast enough. The man was gone. My cabin was destroyed. The officers did a cursory, pathetic search of the area, but refused to go into the woods, saying it was too dense and a waste of time. Desperate, I begged them to at least come with me to Michelle's house. They reluctantly agreed. When we arrived at the property where I'd seen her come and go, my jaw hit the floor. The cabin was a ruin. The windows were boarded up, the porch was sagging, and the entire structure looked like it hadn't been inhabited in decades. The police confirmed it. It was officially listed as abandoned. I told them someone had to be squatting there, a woman and a man. They took a quick look inside, declared there were no clear signs of recent habitation, and told me it would be a waste of resources to investigate further. They basically told me this was the risk I took by living so far from civilization. Then they left. I spent one more night in my wrecked cabin, too scared to sleep, before I packed everything I owned and fled. I never went back. My friends who are into the paranormal have a theory that Michelle was a spirit, a ghost trying to protect me. But I don't believe in that. I believe two very real, very dangerous people were squatting in that abandoned cabin. I just don't know why they targeted me, or why one of them would bother to warn me before the other tried to break down my door. It's a question I know I'll never have an answer to. My name is Luke. My girlfriend, Catherine, and I met our freshman year of college 3 years ago. We both ended up at Stanford, which was a dream come true for me, but we couldn't be further from California natives. We're both from Ohio. She's from Cincinnati. I'm from a small town just outside Columbus. I think that shared Midwestern background is a big part of what drew us together. In a sea of California kids, we were a little island of familiarity for each other. Over the years, we've built our own traditions. The most important one is how we split Christmas. My family is big on Christmas Eve, so Catherine comes home with me for a huge, chaotic, wonderful night with all my relatives. Then, late that night, we pack up my car and make the 2-hour drive to her parents' house so we can be there for Christmas morning. It's a perfect system. But my favorite part of the holiday isn't the presents or the family dinners. It's that late night drive. It's become our own private tradition. The route from my house to hers isn't on a major highway. It's all quiet, 2-lane back roads that wind through empty fields and dark patches of woods, past the occasional farmhouse glowing with a single porch light. At that time of night, on Christmas Eve, we rarely see another car. It feels like we're the only 2 people awake in the entire world. We always blast Juice WRLD, singing along at the top of our lungs. It's our thing. It's special. This past Christmas Eve started out just like all the others. After a great night with my family, we said our goodbyes, packed up the car around midnight, and hit the road. The snow was falling in big, gentle flakes, the heat was cranked up, and the music was loud. Everything felt perfect. Safe. That feeling of safety was about to be shattered in the most bizarre and unsettling way imaginable. I was driving, one hand on the wheel, the other tapping along to the beat on the center console when the music was abruptly cut off by my phone ringing. I glanced down, a little irritated. Who would be calling me this late on Christmas? It was an unknown number. I dismissed it as a spam call without a second thought and hit ignore. Catherine made a joke about the dedication of scam callers working on a holiday. I laughed, and we forgot about it. A few minutes later, it rang again. Same thing. Another unknown number, probably the same one. I let out an annoyed sigh and let it go to voicemail. I could feel Catherine's eyes on me. I tilted the phone so she could see the screen. "That's so weird," she said, a confused little frown on her face. I just shrugged, trying to get back into the comfortable rhythm of the drive. The music started up again. Not 2 minutes later, my phone rang for a 3rd time. That's when the irritation turned to anger. I cursed under my breath, fumbling for the phone, my movements sharp and jerky. I snatched it from the console and swiped aggressively to answer, fully prepared to yell at whoever was on the other end for harassing me. I could feel Catherine flinch beside me at my sudden outburst. "Hello?" I barked into the phone, my voice sharp. I expected to hear the telltale buzz of a call center or a robotic voice launching into a script. Instead, there was only silence. A dead, empty silence, punctuated by a faint, crackling static. I was about to hang up, annoyed at the waste of time, when a voice spoke. A low, gravelly voice that I had never heard before. "Hello, Luke." The sound of my own name, spoken by this complete stranger, sent a jolt of pure ice through my body. I nearly swerved off the slick road. I couldn't speak. I felt my skin start to prickle and itch, a sure sign of my anxiety kicking into high gear. Who was this? Before I could form a response, he continued. He started reciting details about my life. My full name, my home address in Ohio. He mentioned the name of my childhood dog, details that no stranger could possibly know, details I hadn't posted online. My mind was reeling, trying to connect dots that weren't there. This wasn't a prank. This felt like a genuine stalker story. I should have pulled over, but I was frozen, my hands locked on the wheel, my foot steady on the gas. I was in a strange trance of fear. After he paused, I finally found my voice. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep the tremor out of my words. There was a short pause on the other end of the line, and then he delivered the words that turned my blood to ice. "I'm not here for you, Luke. I'm here for Catherine." Hearing her name was 100 times more terrifying than hearing my own. I whipped my head to look at her. Her face was a pale mask of shock, her eyes wide with a horror that mirrored my own. I turned my attention back to the phone, my mind scrambling. I don't know a Catherine," I stammered, a pathetic, transparent lie. "You have the wrong number." The man on the other end let out a low, chilling chuckle. It was a sound completely devoid of humor. "Don't lie to me, Luke," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "She's sitting right next to you." That was it. I couldn't drive. I slammed on the brakes, pulling the car onto the snowy shoulder of the deserted road. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. I was about to scream into the phone to demand answers when Catherine moved. In one swift, sudden motion, she reached across my lap, grabbed my phone, and ended the call. Just like that. The line went dead. "What are you doing?" I screamed at her, the sound raw in the confines of the car. "Why did you do that?" "He was threatening you." She didn't answer. She just stared at me, her eyes wide with what I thought was only fear. I grabbed the phone back, my fingers fumbling as I tried to call the number back. Once, twice, 3 times. It never went through. It was like the number didn't exist. "Keep driving, Luke. Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Just get us out of here." I did. I put the car in drive and pulled back onto the road, but my mind was a chaotic mess. Why would she hang up? Why wouldn't she want to find out who that was? I understand being scared, but her reaction felt wrong. It felt like she was hiding something. That single action planted a tiny, poisonous seed of doubt in my mind. The rest of the drive was suffocatingly silent. The music stayed off. Neither of us said a word, but a million questions were screaming inside my head. Who was that? How did he know who we were, where we were, and that we were together? The only people on Earth who knew our exact plan for that night were our immediate families, and none of them would ever pull a cruel stunt like this. I was sure of it. This wasn't just a prank. It was a targeted, terrifying, scary phone call. Even when we finally pulled into the familiar, warm glow of her parents' driveway, the feeling of safety didn't return. The fear followed us inside. It's been almost a month now, and I still have no answers. We asked our families. No one knows anything. Catherine swears she's as clueless and terrified as I am, but that moment, the moment she hung up the phone, is burned into my memory. A small, dark part of me can't shake the feeling that she knows more than she's letting on. I've been living on a knife's edge ever since. Every time my phone rings, my stomach plummets. I brace myself, waiting to hear that gravelly voice on the other end of the line. I know he's going to call back. I don't know when, and I don't know why, but I know it's just a matter of time. Sometimes the greatest horrors aren't monsters in the dark, but the chilling realization of how vulnerable we truly are. Thanks for tuning in to Daily Horror FM. If these stories sent a chill down your spine, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss our next descent into the darkness. Stay safe out there.